da 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 da. Hi, my name is George. Today we'll be looking at a quick rewrite I threw together for the Orruk Warclans Battletome for Age of Sigmar 4th edition. I also want to apologise in advance for any audio issues. This is my first time making a video of this length, and figuring out microphones has been a bit of a challenge. The goal of this project isn't to suggest that the Orruk Warclans Battletome is fundamentally entirely flawed and should be thrown out. Nothing like that. This is just an experiment I wanted to undertake to address a few issues with things like the Kruleboy's reliability, while also adding to the number of options players have available to them to express themselves through army building. This expansion of player choice is also intended to address a common criticism of Age of Sigmar 4th edition Battletomes in general, that they lack options for player expression and creativity. I also wanted to mess around with the idea of a more unified Orruk Warclans Battletome. If we're going to have these two main factions of Orruks, the Ironjaws and the Kruleboys, sharing a book, then mechanically perhaps it should do more to create a unified play experience, including big war armies. It should be noted that the primary goal here is to inject more fun and flavour into Orruk Warclans armies. Balance, while important, is a secondary concern for now, and will come later if this project gains momentum. Finally, I wanted to add a bit more nuance and a few extra options for the Ironjaws both in play and in their lore. There's only so much you can do when your lore is that your entire army is a bunch of dumb idiots, so I'm gonna mess around with that bit of lore to make them a bit more reminiscent of the brutal and competent Black Orcs from Warhammer Fantasy, the models for which inspired the first Ironjaws models. We'll start with the lore changes. In this, the Kruleboys generally act the same way. They are a mostly cunning and ambush-focused force living in the swamps. In the Age of Chaos, they retreated to the swamps in the realm of Gur in order to hold off the encroaching Chaos armies. The Ironjaws, on the other hand, succeeded because they weren't Orruky, because they were brutal, but they weren't stupid about it. They carry banners, march to the beat of drums, craft weapons and armour of heavy iron, and act as soldiers with the aim not just to fight battles, but to win them. In this way, the Ironjaws are similar to the Uruk-hai of the Lord of the Rings. No one's going to argue that they're not brutal, but they are also a competent and at least semi-professional fighting force. Now, in the past, the Ironjaws' non-Uruki way of waging war limited their numbers a bit, but the Age of Chaos demanded that every Orruk step up and adapt, and the Ironjaws were certainly able to do so. Success begets success, and more Orruks began to turn to the Ironjaws' way of life. With this new approach to the Ironjaws' lore, the reason we don't see more stupid hooligan-type orcs is because they died out. They were unable to adapt their way of fighting war to match the encroaching Chaos forces, and Chaos wiped them out, with the Ironjaws and Kruleboys being the only ones able to fend off the forces of Chaos. There are two concepts that I want to introduce to the Ironjaws lore. The first is the concept that a fist is 5 fingers but brutal, and second is the idea of logisticks. Both of these are intended to add nuance to the faction as a whole, and to prevent it from being just another destruction faction full of big, dumb idiots, to paraphrase Vince Venturella. A fist is 5 fingers but brutal is a very Orruky way of describing a straightforward but important aspect of fighting a battle. That a unit that fights together is far more effective than a bunch of hooligans running around on their own. Now, this doesn't mean that the Ironjaws don't still live, breathe, and bleed for the thrill of the battle. They still love that stuff. But they also love the camaraderie and fellowship that comes with fighting with someone on the battle lines. 2 Ironjaws Orruks might beat the tar out of each other one day, but should an enemy force appear on the horizon, the 2 Orruks will don their armour, heft their shields, and march into battle together, each watching the other's backs because they care about each other. In this way, the Orruks recognise that the fist is made up of 5 pokey fingers, each coming together to make something more brutal than the sum of its parts. It's not complex logic, and Orruk can still grasp it, but it works and it reflects competence. The second concept is logistics, the Orruk word for logistics. The idea of logistics was invented by an anonymous greenskin soon after he had had a spear lodged through his head, hence the name. Part of the reason the old-school greenskins would side-eye the Ironjaws was the Ironjaws embracing this idea of logistics. This radical idea of things like don't leave your food behind and dig the latrines downstream of your drinking water. But the Ironjaws clung to the very straightforward logic that an ill and hungry Orruk is going to be way less brutal than a well-rested and well-fed Orruk. And time has proven them right again and again. Might win fights, but logistics wins wars. And the victories that the Ironjaws forged on the back of this concept of logistics has brought many of their fellow greenskins around to their ways. Now we'll take a look at the army rules. There are now 3 distinct types of Orruk Warclans armies, rather than the 2 types present in the current Battletome. A Kruleboyz army, an Ironjaws army, and a Big War army. Big War is no longer an army of renown. Instead, it is now a third way to build a standard Orruk Warclans army. If you choose a Kruleboyz army, all units in your army must have the Kruleboyz keyword. If you choose an Ironjaws army, all units in your army must have the Ironjaws keyword. And if you choose a Big War army, all units in your army must have the Ironjaws or Kruleboyz keyword. This allows Big War armies to use the same core battle traits as Kruleboyz and Ironjaws armies, and it also allows Big War armies to include thematically appropriate regiments of renown. You could now take some Gits, or maybe some Ogres, the type of creatures that joined Gordrakk on his Big War to Excelsis. In this take on Big War armies, the same army construction restrictions that exist in the current Army of Renown remain. For each regiment you include in a Big War army that is led by an Ironjaws hero, you must include a regiment that is led by a Kruleboyz hero, and vice versa. All units in your army gain the Big War keyword. Kruleboyz heroes included in a Big War army can only include Kruleboyz units in their regiment, and Ironjaws heroes included in a Big War army can only include Ironjaws units in their regiment. If your Big War army includes Kragnos, he can include either Kruleboyz units or Ironjaws units in his regiment, but not both. And he counts as a hero from that faction for the purposes of needing to have one regiment led by an Ironjaws hero for each regiment led by a Kruleboyz hero, and vice versa. Now for battle traits. Each type of Orruk Warclans army, Kruleboyz, Ironjaws, Big War, all use the same core set of battle traits. Battle formations. If your army is an Ironjaws or Kruleboyz army, but not a Big War army, you may pick a battle formation for your army. This is to offset the additional flexibility available to Big War armies, as they are able to use the full selection of Kruleboyz and Ironjaws war scrolls and gain full use out of the Orruk Warclans battle traits. If your army is an Ironjaws army, you may only use an Ironjaws battle formation, and if your army is a Kruleboyz army, you may only use a Kruleboyz battle formation. Next, for enhancements. In addition to the Ironjaws and Kruleboyz heroic traits and artifacts, there is now a third set of enhancements, the Orruk Warclans heroic traits and artifacts. These enhancements can be taken by an Ironjaws or a Kruleboyz hero. Finally, we have the spell and prayer laws. Ironjaws armies are eligible to pick the Law of the Weird spell law and the Warbeats prayer law, while Kruleboyz armies are eligible to pick the Law of the Swamp spell law. A Big War army is eligible to pick the Law of the War spell law and the War chants prayer law. All Orruk Warclans armies, including Big War armies, are eligible to pick the Manifestations of Gorka Morka manifestation law. Now let's go over the battle traits. The battle traits are universally called war tactic abilities and require the expenditure of tactic points. At the start of each battle round, you set your number of tactic points to 0, and then gain a number of tactic points equal to 1 plus the combined number of friendly Ironjaws and Kruleboy heroes on the battlefield that are not part of a regiment of renown. This number scales organically with game size, as you will be able to take more heroes in a larger game. The first change is to venom-encrusted weapons. This ability is no longer restricted to infantry units. The next change is to Sneaky Sneakin', which is no longer restricted to infantry units or units with 10 or fewer models. Instead, you may pick any friendly Kruleboy's unit that is not in combat to be the target of this ability. Lethal Surprise has been kept largely the same, as it is an ability with relatively few conditional riders and an impactful, if situational, effect on the tabletop. When that reinforced unit of Chaos Knights charges you, you'll be glad you have this trick up your sleeve. Mighty Destroyers and Ironjaw's War are useful abilities that have been kept largely the same. Finally, a new ability, Surround 'em, combines the effect of the Kruleboy's Dirty Trick ability with a +1 to hit effect. This effect is designed to help combat Destruction Army's weakness to -1 hit effects that comes with them only hitting on 4 pluses. Next, we'll look at the Ironjaw's battle formations. Of the 4 Ironjaw's battle formations, 2 of them are altered versions of current battle formations, while the other 2 are wholly new. The Grunter Stampede effect has changed from number of enemies destroyed to the current battle round. This allows it to function right from the start of the game and prevents issues where players getting steamrolled would get relatively little effect from their battle trait. The effect of the Weird Fist battle formation is no longer restricted to infantry units, and applies to any friendly Ironjaw's units that are wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Ironjaw's hero unit, not just wizards and priests. The first of the 2 new battle formations is the Iron Fist battle formation. This battle formation grants an ability called Armed to the Teeth. You pick a friendly non-hero Ironjaw's unit to be the target that has not been the target of this ability this turn, and roll a die. On a 3+, you pick one of the following effects to apply to that unit until the end of the phase. Either add 1 to the rend characteristic of the unit's melee weapons, or add 1 to the unit's save rolls. The intention is for the Ironjaw's player to use this ability on each of their eligible units every combat phase, representing the units digging into their personal stash of weapons and armor to pull out the right tool for that particular situation. This ability was inspired by a rule of the same name for the Black Orcs in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. This rule allowed Black Orcs to be equipped with different sorts of weapons and armor, and each combat phase choose which weapon and armor they would fight with during that phase. The second new battle formation is the Edlopper Legion. This battle formation represents the Ironjaw's units competing amongst themselves to collect the most battlefield trophies. The first ability is a reaction in any combat phase when a friendly Ironjaw's unit destroys an enemy hero unit or a champion model. That friendly Ironjaw's unit gains 1 trophy point. The second ability is called Brutal Rivalry. The friendly Ironjaw's unit that has the most trophy points is the best. If 2 or more units have the same number of trophy points, they are both the best. While a friendly Ironjaw's unit is not the best, add 1 to wound rolls for combat attacks made by that unit that target an enemy hero unit or an enemy non-hero unit that contains a champion model. I believe that abilities that exclusively trigger off enemy hero units are just a little too situational to be the foundation for an entire battle formation. And this is why the ability also triggers off enemy champion models. This also allows some degree of counterplay, as the enemy player can now remove champion models from their units, preventing the +1 to wound effect from impacting that unit for the rest of the game. Next, for the Kruleboy's battle formations, we have 4 battle formations that conceptually remain largely the same. The Kruleboy's Claw battle formation ability, Swamp Shroud, is one such ability. It has now been changed to affect friendly Kruleboy's units wholly within 6 inches of a terrain feature rather than 3 inches. This could help give the ability a little bit more play. The Trophy Finger ability Meanest Beasts adds +1 to hit not only to companion weapons used by friendly Kruleboyz units, but also for combat attacks made by friendly Kruleboyz monster units as well, extending the effect to the unit's riders. The Light Finger Battle Formation ability Dead Sneaky has simply been reworded to use the new Orruk Warclans Battle Trait setup. Finally, the Middle Finger Battle Formation has a wholly new ability, Pointed Shots. It is a reaction once per phase army, when an attack ability used by a friendly Kruleboyz unit inflicted damage on an enemy unit. Until the end of the turn, subtract 3 from the control score of the enemy unit, or 5 if the attack was made with a shoot ability. This leans into the vibes of middle fingers as an obscene gesture, as well as the supposed origins of said gesture, when English archers would show off their middle fingers to French knights to indicate that they still had the necessary fingers for drawing their longbows. Now we move on to the Ironjaw's heroic traits. We'll start with Hulking Brute, which is an effective ability that requires no changes. A new ability has been added called Tactical Brutality. You may use it as a reaction once per phase army, when you pick a friendly Ironjaw's unit wholly within 12 inches of this unit to be the target of a command ability. You roll a die. On a 5+, you gain 1 command point. This reflects the new Ironjaw's law of being somewhat consistently competent on the battlefield as soldiers and commanders. Finally, I re-added an ability from previous editions, Ironclad. This reduces the rend characteristics of attacks that target this unit by 1. This ability reflects the massive heavy armour themes of the Ironjaws that so define them as part of the Orruk Warclans. The Kruleboy heroic traits are quite fun and remain mostly unchanged. The main change is to Backstabber, which now allows you to pick any type of enemy unit rather than just hero units. Finally, we have the Orruk Warclans heroic traits. These can be picked by an Ironjaw's or a Kruleboyz hero. The first is an Eye for Defight. This used to be an Ironjaw's heroic trait and remains unchanged. It was moved to the Orruk Warclans heroic trait because it also fits the sneaky movement-based vibes of the Kruleboyz. Mega Bossy is another former Ironjaw's trait, but it fits the general vibes of the Orruks overall and was moved to be a universal Orruk Warclans heroic trait. Finally, we have Dead Nasty. I've been playing a lot of Total War recently, and this is one of my favourite little dialogue snippets from Grimgor Ironhide. This ability is straightforward and reminiscent of similar abilities from other armies. For Ironjaw's artifacts, we'll start with the Amberbone Whetstone. This remains mostly unchanged, except that it now adds 2 to the rend characteristic of the unit's weapons rather than 1. This might be overpowered, but honestly, it's thematic, and a lot of other armies have access to grosser rend effects than simply giving +2 rend to a single hero. The Armour of Gork has been buffed to include an effect from previous editions. Not only does it grant a 6-up ward, but also each time an unmodified ward roll of 6 is made against damage inflicted by a combat attack targeting this unit, 1 mortal damage is inflicted on the attacking unit. This conjures to mind the image of huge, heavy, spiked armour, the type that is as much an offensive implement as a defensive one. Finally, we have the Ed Button Helmet. When you resolve a fight ability for the hero with this artifact, pick one enemy unit within 1 inch of that hero unit, and that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal damage. This is an artifact inspired by an item from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. I just think it's very funny to be able to point to a unit on the tabletop, say bonk, and then have that have an actual in-game effect. For the Kruleboyz artifacts, we retain 2 pre-existing artifacts and bring in a new 3rd one. The Swamp Staff is a useful item and it remains unchanged. The second artifact, the Sack of Sand, used to be called the Eyebiter Ash, but Pocket Sand is funnier. The Mork's Eye Pebble had a lot of overlap with the Sack of Sand / Eyebiter Ash in that it was a once per battle defensive artifact. It has been replaced with the Snot Picker Flinger Finger. In your hero phase, pick an enemy unit within 6 inches of the unit holding this artifact to be the target and roll a d3. On a 2+, subtract the result from the target's control score until the start of your next turn and inflict 1 mortal damage on the target. For the Orruk Warclans artifacts of power, we'll start with the Trophy Skulls. This was originally an Ironjawz artifact, but the Cruel Boys also seem like the type of folks to put a bunch of heads on pikes for a laugh. The Lucky Talon is simple and straightforward, simply allowing the hero who wields it to reroll 1 failed save roll per phase. It might not be the most powerful artifact, but it is easy for new players to understand, and there is value, I think, in having that kind of option around. Lastly, we have the Shiny Shield. You use it as a reaction once per phase when the hero who wields it was picked as the target of a shoot or fight ability. You roll a die, adding 2 if it is the shooting phase, and on a 4+, subtract 1 for hit rolls from attacks that target this unit until the end of the phase. Ironjawz like armour, Cruel Boys like dirty tricks, and thus I think the item works as a thematic combination. Next we'll move on to the spell and prayer laws. The Ironjawz spell law, Law of the Weird, and the prayer law, Warbeats, are both effective laws and remain unchanged. For the Cruel Boys spell law, Law of the Swamp, the Black Pit has been renamed the Deep Dank Hole, because that's funnier. Choking Mist has been renamed to Coffin Fit, because that's more Orruk-y, and the range has been changed from Wholly Within to simply Within, to make the spell a little bit more useful. Finally, Mork's Cunning has been renamed to Dodgy Magic of Dodging, again because that's funnier. The spell law for big war armies, the Law of the War, continues to have a single spell called 2 heads as 1. The previous version of the spell had a conditional rider on its effect. If an Ironjawz unit was the target of the spell, it would have to be near a Cruel Boys unit for the spell to take effect, and vice versa. That rider has now been removed. The prayer law for big war armies, War Chants, also contains a single prayer. The prayer, Unstoppable Warbeats, has seen a single change. The target of the prayer is now no longer required to be an infantry unit. This concludes the first part of my Ironjawz rewrite experiment for fun and science. Part 2 will cover armies of renown, as well as alterations to existing war scrolls and entirely new war scrolls created to fill out the Cruel Boys and Ironjawz rosters. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. Or don't, it's your free time, you can do with it what you want. Thanks for watching and have a great day.